what is the right lens, or how to decide which lens to use? It's a tough one. When you get to a point where you have lots of lenses, you're not quite sure which one to use, because you'll have some lenses that overlap. We'll cover a bit about that and say what we mean by overlap, because that's an interesting subject. How it basically works is you might have lenses that cover the same focal length. So would it be a good idea to have multiple lenses, or have one lens which is always on your camera, which performs well in most scenarios? So the kit lenses are kind of okay. They give you a good overarching photography option for many scenarios. You can get wide shots, you can get zoomed in shots. Apart from that, they are lightweight, so they like kind of a bit of everything. But if you want to start nailing down into specifics, like you want a certain type of photo, and you start saying, you know, actually I do a lot of product photography, I don't really want a kit lens for that, I want something tailored for product photography. Or on the flip side, I do outdoor landscape photography, I want a landscape lens, if there's even such a thing, or a lens that would be better off in that situation. So in that example, lenses that you could look at, there's a few out there. If you're shooting with a Canon camera, the EF lenses 18 to 135 is a solid all-round option. You can put in your camera and use it in many scenarios, for video, for photo, and it works well. So with these, they kind of, price is the main thing. The ones that are all round, I'll call them kit lenses, which is like lenses that tend to come with the camera when you buy them. You can get like under $350-ish at like a good quality later release model. There's a few models in these, some come with image stabilization, some don't. What does that even mean? So image stabilization helps you if you're taking a photograph or making a video clip, for that slight hand movement that you have, so it stabilizes the footage, and that's normally built into lenses on some cameras. If you have cameras, the newer fancier cameras, they actually have image stabilization built into the camera, so any lens you put on there will benefit from having image stabilization. But in Canon's lineup is mostly, they call it IS, image stabilized. Other manufacturers use different names and conventions and things. So the first one is a solid option, is 18 to 135, because it goes a bit further. You can actually zoom in a bit more. 135 being the focal distance you can go into. The alternative to that is 18 to 55, which is smaller, lightweight, and it's smaller, as in size wise, it's smaller, so hold in your hand. So how it works is, the more zoom you have, it needs to actually magnify from the sensor of the camera. So the sensor's all the way back there, and the lens goes on top of it to kind of give you the right lens. So normally when the number is higher, 200 millimeters, 300, 400, the lens will tend to be taller or longer. So one option for most scenarios would be the 18 to 135. Why is that a cheaper lens than other lenses? Because something else comes into play. So if you're totally new to photography, you might know about aperture, which is basically how much light the camera allows into itself, as well as how much depth of field you can have in your photos. So if you're doing landscape photography, you might want something with a wide aspect view, so you can see quite a lot in your shot. You might want something with a high aperture, so you can get enough detail in your shots and not have everything be bokeh or blurry. So in that regard, your numbers here in this 18 to 135, if I use this as an example, it's basically 3.5 to 5.6 aperture. In the grand scheme of things, all my lenses are 2.8 millimeter, 2.8 f-stop. So with that, it means I can have a lower number to shoot with. So what will that mean? If you're taking photographs, it makes you to be sharp and your background to be blurry. That's like a nice overview of that. There are more intense ways of explaining that, but I try and keep it simple. So if I was to spend that money, what would I get? I would get something a bit more, not professional is not the word, a bit more robust. I want it to last a bit longer, and I want it to be, because I know I'm taking photography seriously or video, I'll probably spend a bit more money. So something like a 17 to 40 would be like a nice option there. That gives you a f4 throughout the camera range, so it's one aperture throughout. And in addition to that, it's a luxury professional option from Canon's lineup. That's like slight options, but there are other things there which you can look at a budget as well. So say for example you're doing outdoor, I don't know, wildlife or that kind of stuff, what would you be looking at? The starter lenses you can get with a wider focal distance would be something like a 75 to 300. That would work because you got 300 millimeters, which is quite far. Being able to zoom into maybe like wildlife or deer or birds or some kind of photography depending on what you're doing. And it's a telephoto lens, which means you can get things further away in your camera and your shot and fill more of your screen with it, or your photo. These are cheaper. It's only $200. It's not even that expensive. It's the camera lens, which is 4 to 5.6. So that does mean that they are different ranges, and that as you zoom in, that will change and fluctuate, meaning your shot will look different. So it's like worthy of keeping that in eye. Also, I am live, so if you have any questions, drop them in chat. It's always nice to get your questions, and I can normally answer them because many other people might be thinking the same thing that are listening to this. So that's another option, Canon EF 75 to 300. This is at the lower scale of things, probably similar to lenses that most new people getting into photography will buy, because they're fairly cheap and they give you that option of zooming in if that's what you're looking to do. So there's two lenses there. One is like a good starter. I would say 18 to 55 is a solid lens, but in addition to that, the 18 to 135 millimeters is basically focal length, and it's one lens that's giving you that focal length. Apart from that, we looked at a couple of pros. What about on the flip side of things, and you want something really wide? So maybe you're doing some YouTube videos, you're doing some landscape photography. There's a nice option out there, which is the EFS, which is for the crop sensor cameras. It's a 10 to 22 millimeter, a really wide option. So that's like a nice option for those people that want a really wide shot to show more. Maybe you're doing internal photography for like real estate or rooms or houses, or you just want that cool wide effect. It's like something to think about. So that's another lens. How to decide is going to be hard. Pro lenses out there as well. You could easily spend 2,000 or 3,000 on pro lenses, and why would you do that? So if you're looking for a certain type of look and you want to get a picture that looks very cinematic, very sharp and blurry at the same time, when I say blurry as in getting like a nice background blur, then the aperture is going to be very important. And lenses like the professional EF lenses 70 to 200, like a 2.8 from Canon, is a solid camera lens which I use a lot for fashion photography. If it's low light, you get like good sharp photographs. They look not cinematic but nice. They look, when you look at the photograph, you're like, oh, okay, that's like a magazine worthy shot. And it's down to how the camera treats the photo if you're taking a portrait, for example. So there's a few different ways of looking at it, how much you're investing, what you're looking towards, but lenses make the photo as opposed to a really expensive camera. Most of the time, if you buy a camera and it's like $3,000-4,000, you'll end up getting a lens on top of that. But if you got a good lens and used it with like $1,000 camera, it'll be very difficult for anybody to know. So the camera is where things are stored, and at a certain point it's diminishing returns. You get like a good camera. Both of these cameras are good cameras. I would say that's a starter camera because it's a crop sensor, which is like basically a smaller sensor, and then that camera is more of a professional camera because it's a full frame and it's built more robustly. But these are all things that as you take photos you'll learn them. It's like a slow journey. I've been doing it for years and it kind of just comes to you, second nature. And they perform well. So you see what I mean with the plastic lens there? But the only reason I got this lens is because I got it free with that camera, because you get it as a kit. Like the camera comes with this lens, and I'm not a big fan, but to be honest, I've shot quite a lot with it and it's done alright. Like for video, it's very lightweight and you don't have to think about it, whereas the 24 to 70 is quite a big girthy thing, 2.8 as well, which is the aperture. Solid though, works well. In addition to that, there are some other options still on Amazon which are like not the latest greatest, but let me show you one of these. I would still shoot with them. So EFS for my crop sensor buddies, 17 to 55, and it's a 2.8. So it's not really the luxury lens, but if you're on a bit of a tight budget, it's not as bad. It's like under $900. Whereas to get an equivalent of that in like a full frame body, you're looking close to like 1,000 plus. I've even got the 51.2 in the carousel today, so we can talk about that today. The 1.2, 50mm. I've had the 1.2, I've had the 1.8, and I'm still keeping the 1.4. Out of all three, I kept the 1.4 because it's, for what you're getting, it's a good price. It gives you good quality, and there's not much noticeable. I shoot more at 1.6 to 2 than I do at 1.4. And when I had the 1.2, I was like, I hardly use 1.2 because with the camera, it's very difficult to get someone in full focus. Because like just from there to their eye, you'll be like out of focus if you're not in the right distance. This is the EF one. They do an RF version for the newer cameras like the R6, the R5, the mirrorless from Canon. So that's a good thing to check out if you're in the new market. A macro lens will be amazing. For a long time, I did a lot of product photography not using a product photography lens or not using a macro lens, and you could tell my images were lacking. I had to get loads of light. They weren't really sharp. I'm